Namaste and welcome. I'm Dayna Seraye, co-founder of Hanuman Academy. Welcome back to the Yoga and Self-Mastery Summit. And today we have the great honor and privilege of hearing from Tommy Rosen. Tommy is a yoga teacher, addiction recovery expert, and the founder of Recovery 2.0, which is an online membership portal for those in recovery. So we are so grateful and happy to have you, Tommy. Tommy is a good friend of us here at Hanuman, everything Hanuman, and it's just a great delight to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dayna. I am so delighted to talk to you today.
Yay. So we're talking about yoga and self-mastery and really cultivating the deeper dimensions of practice and sort of steering the conversation in that way. When we look around the yoga world, maybe there's some other conversations happening, and we really just want to sort of elevate and uplift and come back to the roots, the origins of the practice of yoga and what we're really doing here. And I'd love to hear from you. Everyone's got kind of a unique perspective on this. What is self-mastery, and how can the path of yoga bring us closer to this path? And why do we even want this path? What's the point?
It's interesting. I'm going back to classical definitions, and classical texts is where I'm getting my ideas from, specifically Patanjali and the Yoga Sutras. But Patanjali starts his very first sutra of the 196 sutras is "and now yoga." And now yoga. And it's not even a complete sentence, and yet we know that Patanjali wrote this intentionally. And what does it mean? What could it mean? It's so important to begin there. For me, it basically means, you have had enough of looking in the wrong places for the answer to your problem. And I think yoga, real yoga, meaning the movement towards union, towards one's fullest potential. You use the term personal mastery. I think it begins in earnest when a person is done looking in the outside world for the answer. And I think when you get to that point and you're like, wow, I have looked everywhere. And for me personally, I had looked everywhere. We look to relationships and love. We look to power, and we look to money, and we look to sex, and we look to drugs, and we look to alcohol and other forms of distraction. Because on some innate level, we feel that there's something here, but we can't get to it. If only we could get to it, And Patanjali says, look, if you've had enough of looking in the wrong places, in the outside world, for the answer to your riddle, now we can start yoga. Now we can begin. So I think when people come to yoga, just because they're attracted to yoga, a physical practice, for example, asana practice, I think that's an unbelievable blessing for that person.
Yeah.
That they find their way into the physical practice. And maybe they've even found their way there before they're done looking in the outside world or in these other places, like me. Finding my way to yoga in 1991. I'm newly sober. I have a lot of confusion in my life, a lot of drama. But I found my way to a physical practice, and the physical practice does what it does, which is it will teach you certain lessons that you need to learn. In my case, I needed to learn humility. I needed to learn, I didn't just get to be more flexible or stronger just because I demanded it and on any given day on my mat, because that will lead to injury. And so you learn through injury. And it's very, often in that scenario, people are very quick to say, oh, yoga, I got hurt doing yoga. No, you hurt yourself in your approach to yoga. And that was either your fault or a combination of your fault and your teacher's fault. But it was the approach. It wasn't the yoga, it was the approach. So you get to the physical practice of yoga when you get there. And then things start to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And relationships start to change. The way you see yourself in the world starts to change. It just does.
Yeah.
If you have a dedicated practice, that's what's going to happen. And so without you even knowing it, you're on the path to personal mastery. Whether that's even a thought in your mind or an intention, or whether you care about deeper spiritual matters or not, is not important. The practice will teach you what the practice will teach you. And for each of us, it will be an individual and unique experience.
Beautiful. So, addiction, you've come from a background of a lot of addiction and a lot of sobriety at this point in your life, on the path of recovery for a long time. It seems to me like addiction is way more prevalent than some of us realize or even understand. Like, we can see the big addictions, like you mentioned, drugs, alcohol, sex, things like that are really obvious addictions. And then there are ways that maybe things aren't as obvious or as well known that might be still distractions. What would you define as an addiction?
The definition I work with is any behavior you continue to do despite the fact that it brings negative consequences into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Any behavior.
Mm.
So I write about and I speak about the big six, which are, you touched on them, I touched on them before, but it's drugs, alcohol, food, people addictions, so sex, codependency, other relationship disorders,
Mm-hmm.
money addictions, that's the fifth, and then technology.
That's a big one.
Yeah, now technology can be used for really wonderful purposes, or it can be used as a distraction to avoid yourself.
Right.
But those are the most glaring places where we see human beings getting tripped up. But beyond that, there's more subtle forms of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about the 4 aggravations. So that's negative thinking, self-doubt, procrastination, and resentment. Now, people are very quick to say, well, wait a minute, Tommy, I don't crave those things.
Sure.
How are those things an addiction? And I say, well, let's go back to my definition.
Uh-huh.
Any behavior you continue to do, despite the fact that it brings negative consequences into your life. Now, all of those 4, negative thinking, self-doubt, procrastination, and resentment, absolutely bring negative consequences into your life. And they are behaviors that we continue to do, despite that fact. So for me, it's very clear. It fits my definition of addiction. And by the way, this solves a problem. It's not us and them. It's the human condition, the human experience. It's all of us.
Yeah.
We're all on the spectrum.
Right.
And it doesn't mean we have to walk around and call ourselves an addict
Mm-hmm.
and label ourselves this or that. It's just that as we move along the path towards personal mastery, we're going to want to understand the areas where we're vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
or where we need work. So you might say to yourself, wow, if you can catch it, I woke up this morning and I had a lot of negative thinking going on.
Mm-hmm.
Judgment of other people, or anxiety about the day that, was about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, and, am I going to be able to do it all? That sense of overwhelm that many of us have, especially these days.
Yes.
And so you wake up with that negative thinking, and now you're either becoming aware of it,
Mm-hmm.
and then doing something about it.
Yeah.
Or you get dragged around throughout the rest of the day behind the momentum of this negative thinking, and it saps you of your energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it prevents you from your creativity. It puts a block between you and your creative self. Certainly, it's not an intuitive place to be.
Mm-mm.
So if you don't catch it and shift it, you're stuck a little bit for that day.
Mm.
And I think the tragedy is that I think people live this way, day in and day out, for long, long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is why I think it's so important that we understand addiction from a much broader perspective.
Yeah.
And so you could say, oh, wow, negative thinking. Wow, I do that a lot. I do that a lot. Or I feel put upon by my thinking. I feel like my thinking is mastering me rather than the other way around. What can we do? Well, Patanjali tells us in the very next sutra, the very next sutra, the second sutra, what we can do. Yoga is the calming of the fluctuations of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. How interesting that the mental affliction or the mental piece of addiction shows up right here in this 2,300-year-old text at the very beginning. And it's the actual definition of yoga. Once your mind is calm, you're in the state of yoga. So from a personal mastery standpoint, I'm going to be interested in moving closer to that state on a daily basis. What can I do to move closer to the state of yoga? Well, we have physical practices. We have breath practices, pranayama. We have meditation practices. And we have community. We also have our choices around food and our choices around media. Our choices around the company that we keep. And we have our choices around the environments that we find ourselves in. So all of these things will go together towards a life where we're breaking out of that addiction, that unconscious negative thing that happens to almost everybody, even before their eyes open in the morning. And then we're like, oh, okay, there's something we can do. There's something we can do.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it's really the thoughts in the mind that create the addictive patterns, and that the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind brings us into the state of yoga. And so really it's these thoughts in the mind, right?
Well, it's one component.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. The desired outcome is the calming of the fluctuations of the mind. But since we're human beings and we come in this interesting machinery, these human bodies, in order to get to the desired outcome, a calm mind, we actually have to work with the body.
Yeah.
Because, interestingly, the body carries, literally and figuratively, it carries the past.
Yeah.
Emotions, emotional energy, trauma, memory, stress, resentment, it's all in the body. We think about it, it has an effect on our thinking, but it lives here in the body. So beautiful thing about yoga is the way to get to the desired outcome, the state of yoga where the mind is calm, includes a variety of tools.
Yes.
Thankfully. And so yoga, this path addresses physical detoxification, emotional detoxification, spiritual cleansing and clearing. It's really working at all levels of the being. And I think that's what ultimately brings success in the treatment of addiction.
Right.
Importantly, to put it another way, if we don't treat the body, the mind, the spirit, all levels of our being, I think that we're going to be less successful and have poorer outcomes in our treatment protocols. This is why I think yoga is so critically important on the path of recovery from addiction, or the path of just a human being moving from confusion to clarity, or sickness to health, darkness to light, that kind of thing.
Right. So how would you say yoga, meditation, these different practices in the system of yoga help us to uncover the addictions? Because sometimes, right, we don't even know we're doing it. They're so insidious, there's so many ways that they kind of get in. How does it help us uncover what our patterns are?
Yes. Well, let's start with the grosser elements, the most evident and the most clear behavior patterns that we have. So usually someone who's drinking alcohol, say every day, they're aware of it. Like, oh, okay, I drink every day. Now they may not think that's a problem.
Right.
And they may not recognize what the downside is to that.
Yeah.
And that, it just in the level of consciousness at which they're existing in the world, this seems often to people to be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it is just fine for them, for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens with yoga is you start to pay attention first. Now, it's very simple, actually, but it's a weird concept that if you do something physically, it translates emotionally and mentally. So, for example, when I just said, well, you pay attention first. Well, the teacher might say to you, close your eyes and focus on your inhale and your exhale. And so you close your eyes and you focus for a moment until you don't. Now, you might be able to just be in the focus of, okay, I'm inhaling. All right, there's an exhale, right? And just going through that, now you're starting to pay attention. You're starting to pay attention to a more subtle part of yourself, an internal part of yourself, something that's happening. It's a relationship with life, and it's a relationship with breath. So you're now paying attention. After 90 minutes of paying attention like that, you have been involved in an incredibly intimate experience, maybe the most intimate experience with yourself that you've ever had. Because when have you ever paid attention to the inner world or the effort that you're paying attention to for 90 minutes at a time? It's very, very rare. And yet, as yogis, this becomes a part of our everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, paying attention to the breath or to a physical movement starts to direct energy in a different way than energy is used to being directed or used to happening for you.
Right.
Normally you go through life and you just sort of float. There's not necessarily a plan. I'm not really sure how to do better. I'm just going to just sort of try and see what comes up in the day, and I'll just do my best as it all comes up. Which is fine, except once you start practicing yoga and you develop a little bit more ability and capacity to focus and concentrate, and to draw upon resources that are not available to you before your practice, before you started to do yoga.
Yeah.
So you can start drawing on the power that comes from breath, the power that comes from attention, the power that comes from your ability to direct prana or life force around the body. And that changes your life. It changes the way you are in relationship to others. It changes the way you are in your work. Very often people will get on a path of yoga, and after a while they're like, I can't do what I'm doing anymore. That could be a relationship, or that could be job, or that could be an environment that they're living in. I can't do this anymore. Why not? I just can't tolerate this. Why not? You used to tolerate it. Yeah, but
It makes me think of the saying, ignorance is bliss.
right.
Sometimes, we get deeper into the path of yoga and all of a sudden we see everything and everything comes up, and yes, there are more challenges and things do start to feel more uncomfortable.
Right.
Perhaps. Yeah.
So this is very important, what you're saying. And in any quest for the truth, you have to turn the lights on. And you have to look around. And if the lights haven't been on for a while, you turn the lights on and all of a sudden you're like, wow, what a messy room I'm in. Wow, how did this dirt get here?
Yeah.
And you realize I haven't been paying attention at a deeper level.
Right.
And so at first it might be uncomfortable, but you must go. You must go forward down this path, not because I say so, or your teacher says so, or your parents say so, or a friend says so, but because you can no longer tolerate life the way it has been. So again, we come to, and now yoga. Are you done? Like trying to, distract yourself from what is.
Mm-hmm.
When you're ready to look at what is and work with it and grow through it, now that's really, you're on the path of yoga. You're on a direct path and a very quick path to self-mastery, personal mastery.
Wow, beautiful. And I was starting to think about some neuroscience. I'm sure in your Recovery 2.0, you talk a lot about the science of recovery and the way that these practices actually affect our neural pathways and help us create the new pathways for new conscious choices. Can you speak a little bit about, that? I'd love that.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm looking at the brain. I'm going to include that in the physical.
Mm-hmm.
So as we talk about recovery has to address the body.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll include the brain in that, physical, the mind, and the spirit. It has to work on every level of the being.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we can look at brain function and what we know, thankfully, to all of the incredible research that's gone on in the past couple of decades, we know a few things. Number one, we understand how habit forms.
Yeah.
And that's really important. Like we actually know how to create a habit. And it used to be that we didn't realize we could uncreate a habit.
Mm-hmm.
Or we didn't realize that we could create a new habit that replaced the old habit.
Yeah.
But essentially, once you know how to create a habit, now you know how addiction is created in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
At that level. There's other levels, remember, but at that level, now we understand addiction a little better. Take an action that's harmful in some way, whether you realize it or not, and repeat that action. And the more you repeat it and the longer period of time that you repeat that action, the deeper the groove will be.
Mm-hmm.
The more fixed the neural pathway will be. And it becomes exceedingly difficult to break out of some of those neural pathways that have been entrenched because of your repetition of a harmful behavior based upon certain stimuli in the external or internal environment, a choice that you make over and over and over and over again. That's what you're wired to do.
Right.
Once you're wired that way, wow, it's tough.
Yeah.
Also, you've got in the brain, not just the neural pathways, but you also have the reward centers and the incentive centers, dopamine.
Right.
So really important concept. If you understand dopamine, it basically just gives you a reason to do anything, a reason to be. If you didn't have any dopamine left in your brain, you would lay there and you would die. You would have no incentive. If someone put a plate of healthy food next to you and you were starving to death, you couldn't go for it. You wouldn't go for it because there's nothing that motivates you to do it. That's how dopamine is.
Amazing.
It's powerful. So for a person in addiction who's been artificially elevating their dopamine levels, when they get sober for the first time, and it depends on the different drugs have different effects, right? But when they get sober, almost all of them, dopamine levels drop. And your desire to be alive, your desire to wake up, your desire to engage with people, to engage in life and the day is so low.
Wow.
And you think, well, I feel terrible.
Right.
I don't feel any incentive to do anything. I feel without passion, without enthusiasm. Not a great way to live.
No.
And you can see from that perspective why it's so hard for people to get and to stay sober.
Right.
Now yoga comes in. If you practice yoga, you can repair those centers, bring balance, recalibrate, heal much, much more quickly than if you do nothing. And your diet will be so important in this process as well. So, and by the way, I'm making statements which I can't prove other than anecdotally. This has been my direct experience for myself and in working with thousands of people over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
But I don't have a study to point to, oh, in this study we prove that, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, yeah.
The evidence, which is good enough for me, is anecdotal. I've seen it work in my life. Yoga speeds up the healing process from addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've seen it, this is why I urge people to adopt a yoga practice early in their recovery, and also to look at their diet. So from the brain perspective, a lot going on that relates to addiction,
Yeah.
and not just in terms of neural pathways, but also in terms of the chemical centers.
Yeah. And yoga helps us to even create new neural pathways. So we rewire the brain.
Yeah. So that rewiring piece and the changing of a habit, adopting a new habit, it's a wise thing that Yogi Bhajan once said. You cannot drop a habit. You can exchange a habit.
Right. Right.
You can exchange one habit, hopefully for a better habit.
Right.
That you can do.
Right.
And so that's what we're working on in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yoga and meditation happen to be extraordinary habits to help you heal, learn, and grow.
Right.
But certainly not the only ones,
Right.
for people in recovery. Exercise, cardiovascular exercise,
Mm-hmm.
Running, athletics, art and music, getting engaged in things that you really love, connecting with people. Like, this is all going to be part of the healing process.
I love in nutrition, in the nutrition world, the crowding out philosophy, like crowd out the bad foods instead of just try to eliminate them. So
That's
add
right.
so much good in there that they're crowded out. There's no more room for the
I love
bad.
it.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful concept. And I just, at the beginning, when people are like, well, what do I have to give up? I'm like, well, only drugs and alcohol. And now just add 16 to 64 ounces of healthy organic juices to your diet each day. Start at 16, spend a few weeks there, go up to 32, spend a few weeks there, and you're just going to start loving these juices so much, and it's absolutely going to change your approach to food. And it's also very healing and nourishing.
Yes. Well, yeah, that sounds good. So Tommy, is there anything else that is feeling just really important to you right now that people, yogis, people interested in the path of yoga, that you would like them to grok, to deeply understand, embody? What is your message right now?
So with regards to something I would say to yogis or people on this path of yoga and meditation, ultimately, the repetition of a sadhana practice, a morning practice of some kind, seems to unlock a lot of possibilities. So going to classes is also wonderful. And making yoga a regular part of your life is wonderful. And you don't have to take my word for it. You either already know that or you'll feel it. You also can't rush this thing. Like, you don't have to rush. If you're starting, you don't have to do 7 classes of yoga a week. Just come at it from the place of joy. Because if you really enjoy it, you'll get the most out of it. Someone who enjoys their yoga going 3 days a week will get a lot more out of it than someone who's forcing themselves to go 7. And go slow and take the long view. There really, really is no rush. You're on a wonderful path. If you found a teacher that you love and who you respect and whose life seems to be going well and who enjoys themselves, they have to enjoy themselves. Stick close to that person. Learn everything you can. And continue your evolutionary path. And the last thing I'd say is, this is an evolutionary path. It's on purpose an evolutionary path. We change all the time. There's never a moment where we are going to be able to hold on really to anything. So just recognize that we're in this path of an unfolding reality. And we get to participate in it and be joyful with it. And we will feel lots of challenge through it. And that's all really good. And that's part of the human human experiment, the human condition. And it just so happens that people who have found yoga just have some, what I consider to be rather advanced tools for advancing and moving forward in their own path.
Yeah.
So it's good news. It's very good news.
It's such good news. And you made me think of this too shall pass. You know, just that's such a good mantra when we are in the maybe lulls, in the times where it feels uncomfortable.
Yes.
You know, knowing that change is constant and next moment is a new moment.
Yes, yes. It also serves us when we're really elated and feeling great.
It's true.
Just to remember.
Right.
No.
Right.
The sea of life is happening.
Right. Don't get attached. Yeah. Yay, Tommy. Thank you so much. It was so beautiful. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. And thank you all for joining in and receiving all of this beautiful wisdom from Tommy and all these teachers in the Yoga and Self-Mastery Summit. And you can find Tommy at recovery2.0.com.
Actually, that's true. But we're launching our new membership this coming Tuesday, which whenever you watch this has probably already happened. So r20.com.
r20.com.
Yeah.
That's easy.
It's so
beautiful.
Easy.
So easy. All right. Thank you, Tommy. Blessings.
Thank you, so
Namaste.
much love.